If you walk down the produce aisle of a modern supermarket, you are looking at one of the greatest illusions in human history. Every bright piece of fruit, every crisp leaf of spinach, every root vegetable is entirely unconditionally safe. You can pick up anything, bite into it, and your body will convert it into energy. But if you were to step out of that supermarket and walk into a pristine, untouched forest from 10,000 years ago, that absolute safety vanishes. The landscape changes from a buffet into a green minefield. Nearly every plant you see is actively trying to avoid being eaten. Because plants cannot run away, fight back, or hide, they became the ultimate chemical weapons factories of the planet. For hundreds of millions of years, plants engaged in an evolutionary arms race against predators. They developed an astonishingly complex arsenal of secondary metabolites designed specifically to disrupt the biological systems of anything trying to eat them. Some synthesize alkaloids that stop a heart from beating. Others produce cyanogenic glycosides that release lethal cyanide gas inside the stomach. Some create toxins that mimic hormones, causing reproductive failure, while others specialize in compounds that dissolve the lining of the liver or kidneys. To an early human, a new forest wasn't just an unfamiliar home, it was a laboratory of lethal possibilities. There's a popular, comforting myth about how our ancestors navigated this treacherous terrain. The idea is simple: trial and error. Someone ate a berry, dropped dead, and everyone else in the tribe watched, took a mental note, and never ate that berry again. But when you look at the actual science of plant toxins, that theory completely falls apart. If human survival depended entirely on a deadly game of random guessing, our species would have gone extinct before we ever left the African savanna. The biggest flaw in the trial and error theory is latency. Many of the most lethal plants on Earth do not kill you instantly. Consider the death cap mushroom. It tastes perfectly fine, often described as sweet, nutty, or mild. You eat it, and for the first 24 hours, absolutely nothing happens. Meanwhile, inside your body, the toxins are silently shutting down cellular protein synthesis and destroying your liver. By the time severe pain appears, the damage is completely irreversible. In a hunter-gatherer context, connecting an agonizing death on a Thursday to a pleasant root you dug up on a Tuesday is an incredibly difficult cognitive leap, especially when you ate 20 other species of plants in between. To survive this, early humans couldn't rely on luck. They needed a system. And the first line of defense in that system wasn't a cultural rule or an intellectual breakthrough. It was hardwired directly into their DNA. It was the human sense of taste. We think of taste as a mechanism for pleasure, but evolutionarily, it is a highly advanced chemical analysis laboratory. Humans have 5 basic tastes, but the distribution of our taste receptors is wildly unequal. We have only a few types of receptors for sweetness, which signals harmless carbohydrates, but we possess 25 distinct functional genes dedicated exclusively to detecting bitterness. This is because bitter compounds in nature are almost universally associated with toxic alkaloids. When a child reacts with visceral disgust with green vegetables, they are experiencing a deeply buried evolutionary reflex. Young children have highly sensitive bitter receptors because, in the wild, an infant wandering away from the camp and chewing on random leaves was a constant threat. This intense aversion was a biological shield, an internal alarm system that forced our ancestors to instantly spit out potential poisons long before they reached the stomach. It was an involuntary physical veto over what entered the body. But taste alone wasn't a perfect shield. Many toxic plants mask their bitterness, or their toxicity depends entirely on which part you eat, or the season you harvest it. To conquer the botanical world, humans had to look beyond their own senses. They became master observers of the animal kingdom, studying what scientists call zoopharmacognosy. For generations, hunter-gatherers watched how animals interacted with the landscape, noticing which berries birds ignored and which leaves wild pigs dug up. But this strategy carried hidden dangers. A forest bird can feast on the berries of deadly nightshade because their digestive tracts don't absorb the atropine the same way a human's does. A deer can consume massive amounts of poison ivy because their stomachs contain specific microbes that break down the toxic oils safely. Because of this, our ancestors focused their attention on our closest genetic relatives, primates. Baboons, chimpanzees, and monkeys share a highly similar digestive physiology with humans. If a troop of chimpanzees spent hours carefully peeling a specific vine to eat the inner pith while discarding the outer bark, humans took notice. They observed not just what the primates ate, but exactly how they prepared it. They even watched animals use plants as medicine, noticing that sick chimpanzees would deliberately chew bitter, toxic leaves they normally avoided to kill intestinal parasites, without swallowing the harmful plant fiber. This provided a foundational cheat sheet for survival. Yet, even with taste and animal observation, thousands of plants remained complete mysteries. To unlock these, humans developed an incremental testing protocol, the ancient equivalent of the modern military's universal edibility test. The protocol is a masterclass in calculated risk management. You never just put an unknown plant in your mouth. First, you separate it into its component parts: roots, stems, leaves, buds, and flowers, because toxins are rarely distributed evenly. A fruit might be perfectly edible, while its seeds contain lethal cyanide. Once separated, the test begins externally. You crush the plant and rub it against the sensitive skin of your inner wrist. If the skin flushes, burns, or blisters over the next few hours, the plant is immediately rejected. If the skin remains clear, you move to the lips, holding a small piece there for several minutes to check for tingling or numbness. Next, you place it on your tongue without swallowing, checking for chemical heat or extreme bitterness. If it passes, you chew a tiny portion and hold it in your mouth for 15 minutes. If there is still no reaction, you finally swallow that single, minuscule bite. Then you stop. You do absolutely nothing else for 12 hours, sitting and waiting to see if your stomach cramps, your vision blurs, your heart races. This incredibly slow, methodical process was repeated over thousands of generations. But the true genius of ancient humans wasn't just identifying which plants were poisonous. It was figuring out that some of the most poisonous plants on Earth could become valuable staples if you knew how to break their defenses. Consider cassava, a hardy root that today feeds over 800 million people. Raw cassava is packed with a compound that converts directly into hydrogen cyanide inside the stomach. A single raw root can easily kill an adult. Yet, ancestors in the Amazon didn't abandon it. Instead, they invented an elaborate processing method using nothing but stone, wood, and water. They discovered that grating the root into pulp ruptured the plant cells, releasing the initial cyanide gas. Then they placed the pulp into long woven baskets designed to squeeze out the toxic juices under immense pressure. Finally, they washed the remaining paste and dried it in the sun, allowing the last traces of the volatile gas to evaporate. What remained was a perfectly safe, highly nutritious flour. We see this exact same pattern across the world. In North America, indigenous peoples harvested acorns, which are heavily defended by bitter tannins that destroy human kidneys. They realized that by crushing the acorns and burying them in the sand of a flowing riverbed, the running water would gradually leach the water-soluble toxins out over several weeks. In the Andes, humans noticed that wild animals deliberately consume specific types of clay after eating toxic plants. The clay particles possess an ionic charge that binds directly to the toxic alkaloids in the stomach, neutralizing them. Humans adopted this exact behavior, dipping wild, bitter potatoes into a slurry of clay and water before eating them, neutralizing the dangerous solanine toxins right inside their digestive tracts. All of this life-saving data could easily be lost in a single generation if it wasn't preserved. Because ancient humans didn't have textbooks, they encoded their botanical knowledge into the fabric of their culture, embedding it in mythology, sacred songs, and strict cultural taboos. An elder wouldn't just tell a teenager that a specific red berry was dangerous. They would tell a story about a spirit that took the form of that berry to steal the breath of young hunters. They wove the descriptions of plants into songlines, complex oral maps sung during long journeys. A specific verse of a song, passed down flawlessly for thousands of years, might describe the exact bending of a riverbank where a medicine plant grew, or the specific phase of the moon when a root transitioned from a deadly poison into a remedy. These stories were beautifully compressed data packages that kept communities alive across centuries. Today, we live in a world where our connection to that ancient software is entirely severed. We don't need to read the behavior of primates, and we don't need to test a leaf against our skin. We have outsourced our survival to a vast agricultural infrastructure. But that infrastructure is a luxury built on the backs of millions of forgotten scientists. The true pioneers of botany were the nameless ancestors who walked through unknown forests, listening intently to the warnings of their taste buds, watching the habits of animals, and meticulously testing the boundaries of life and death. They suffered the cramps, they endured the blindness, and sometimes they paid the ultimate price, all to write the invisible guide that allows us to walk down a grocery aisle today without a single worry in the world.